I don't know who you are, but welcome to the Irish Photography Podcast. Sit back, relax, and listen about cameras, gear, settings, stories, and all things photography. Join Darren on Ireland's Best Photography Podcast. Let's go.
Steven Hanna, welcome to the Irish Photography Podcast. How are you getting on, buddy?
Not too bad. Thanks so much for having me on. How's things down with
Thanks
you?
very much for coming on. Things are good now, yeah. Things are good. You know, we're in our lockdown down here, but you know, you're not in the same restrictions, I suppose, that we have. So you have a small bit of more freedom, I think, do you?
Yeah, our restrictions are a little bit more lenient. I think it seems to be more about the hospitality sector with us. So restaurants, hotels, all that kind of thing are all closed, but we can still travel about. So really, there's been no issues kind of getting out and about as long as we stay, you know, we're not crossing any borders or doing anything like that. So yeah, it's been okay.
Good. You know, as I suppose from our point of view down here, we can go 5 kilometers, so it's quite restrictive. So, you know, you can look out the window and see autumn colours and dream about being able to get out and get shots of them. But, you know, I suppose we'll talk about that with you actually, because I saw that you were out in the peak of it actually, and I was looking totally jealous. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a lot of plans to head down south, to head down to Wicklow, to Cloughley and Glenmalure and a few places, but I stayed local this year. I spent a lot of time in Tullymore, which is not a bad place to be stuck for the autumn colour. So
True story, yeah.
I spent a lot of time down there this year, which was really nice, and it was looking amazing, you know, this year. So not to make you jealous.
Yeah,
but
I was totally jealous, when I was looking at it. But at least, you know what, I suppose I, like a lot of people, could at least see it vicariously by looking at your feed, because, you know, autumn is a beautiful time of the year, but we were lucky to see that you were able to get into Tullymore and show the beauty of it, yeah.
Yeah, it was actually quite interesting because it was very, very busy over that kind of week that it peaked, because it was at the time where the schools were off for Halloween. So you were... obviously there were a lot of photographers about. It was nice to meet a lot of people and kind of bump into a few familiar faces that you tend to bump into this time of the year in certain locations, which was nice. But yeah, a few of the locations now were a little bit busy, like the Stepping Stones, which is one of the iconic places in Tullymore.
Hotspots, yeah.
It was very, very difficult to photograph, just with the amount of people that were trying to cross the river and, you know, do their own photos and family days out, which we're all entitled to. So that was quite interesting. So it was, but
For
yeah,
sure.
It was very busy this year.
What you was going to say, was it hard to get a clean shot, like with the amount of people that would be around there all the time? And it's I've never been there, but I can imagine that there's a confined area that you can get your ideal composition, but you've somebody else that's thinking that that's something that they could be part of unwittingly or unknowingly, or maybe so.
Yeah, so we a really good time to shoot the Stepping Stones at this time of the year is in the late afternoon, because the sun can actually creep round. So if you kind of get the angles right, you can get a nice flare coming through the trees.
Yes.
The only issue with that is that it's probably one of the busier times in the forest. So on the Wednesday of that Halloween week, I had a 1-to-1 workshop, and we went down and we sat for probably over an hour at the Stepping Stones, just to try and get a little bit of a segment where there was no one on it. And I think I counted at one point there might have been nearly 50 people standing to the side, at either side, either waiting to go across, or they were taking selfies or photos of people on the Stepping Stones. And the guy that was out with me, he was doing like 30-second long exposures, trying to blur people
erased,
and the really frustrating thing was the light was absolutely magical. It was just coming down in like shafts through the trees just behind him, and it was just it was like one of those moments you just wanted to scream. But so what we ended up doing, we kind of took a lot of different shots, and we're kind of going to try and like make a composite almost of kind of blending in empty areas from different shots, because it was just a nightmare. There was no other way of doing it. Yeah, it was. Ouch. I think Tullymore has like 3 massive big car parks, and they were all full. Like it was like completely rammed. So,
wow.
But at the same time, that it's good that people are getting out and enjoying the beauty that we have, because I think one of the things that lockdown has taught a lot of people is to look at what we have on our doorstep and to
For
enjoy
sure.
what we have.
Yeah,
So in a way,
for
it's
sure.
it's kind of bittersweet, but that's just photographers being, fussy and grumpy and selfish.
Yeah,
you
I
know,
suppose you know what there is something to be said, I suppose, in relation to that, because the amount of people that want to get out right now because they've
yeah,
been confined for so long, and then when you finally do get out, okay, it's weekends, you might go, it's peak time, but if you're during the week, it's supposed to be not. But obviously, if the kids been on midterm, then
yeah,
let's go. It's a nice day. Let's get out where we can go, because come next week, kids are going to be back into school or whichever, and then bang, we're into the winter time. It's dark before you even realize it. What are you going to do? So
yeah.
I think absolutely, probably, a culmination of perfect timing for the autumn colours, and then obviously people being on midterm as well. It's all colliding together, and then you add in the photographer on top of that,
Yeah,
and multiple photographers all wanting to get those shots at that peak time. Then it's going to be a busy, busy spot. Yeah.
it is. And although the funny thing was, and I think it's probably credit to the the community of photographers, is that certain places like the likes of Foley's Bridge. I'm not sure if you've
Yes.
shot it before, but it's
No, I've
probably
never been there.
one of the most iconic bits, other than the stepping stones. So the Foley's Bridge, beautiful arched old stone bridge surrounded by colour. Like the autumn colours are
Hmm.
insanely good, and it's funny because we were kind of almost queuing up, and we were giving each other space, and no one was really fighting to get in for a shot. It was a really nice.
Camaraderie.
Yeah, it was, because people were waiting, and it was like, no, there's no rush, take your time. I'm just happy enjoying being out, and then when someone else finished, they moved on, and so it was lovely. It's a nice. I just thought it was a nice community
Mm.
spirit in it. So we were all kind of there to do the same thing, and we weren't kind of jostling for, who
Position.
could take the better shot.
Yeah, and I suppose offside of that, then people looking at that online, like me, I'm going, I wish I could be out taking photographs. Look where he's at. Oh my God, So yeah, it kind of swings on both sides really, and you're there in the middle of it. You're kind of going, okay, I want to get more space to myself, but looking out in, I'd do anything to kind of be in that
Yeah,
situation right now, because we couldn't do anything. Like I, like you, had a lot of plans that were for that period of time. I actually took time off from work as well to make the most of the autumn period, and
hmm,
then bang, lockdown came. I couldn't leave Cork, and then after that, I couldn't go 5 kilometres from my home. And I'm like, all right, okay. And the whole deer rut was happening down in Killarney, and I wanted
yeah,
to go down to that. The whole lot all put by the wayside. So, like I say, thanks very much for kind of making me jealous, but also giving me an insight into seeing what it was like I say, living it vicariously. And that's what made me want you to get you on, because when I was thinking, you know what, he's lucky he can get out there, he can involve himself in seeing the beautiful conditions that he has and get those photographs, which are kind of, something that I can't get anyway, and a lot of people I think that can't get at the moment. But before we even go any further, I suppose, Stephen, really, just in case somebody doesn't know, who is Stephen Hanna? Tell us a bit more about yourself.
So, wow. I am a full-time photographer. I shoot landscapes and I shoot weddings. Um, I am probably one of those people who are fortunate enough that my job is also my hobby, or my hobby is my job, whatever way
Hmm.
you want to look at it.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I'm a husband, father. I enjoy the outdoors, and yeah, I suppose that's about me in a nutshell. I just keep my head down and get on with it.
Exactly, and have fun along the way with your
Absolutely.
hobby that
Yep.
helps you to pay the bills, as they say.
Yep. Absolutely.
And let me ask you, I suppose, then, where does the word NEBO come from?
So NEBO, we did a rebrand. So initially, before, I just traded under my own name, but it's just with Steven Hanna Landscapes. And
Yes.
uh, for our family, our faith is important to us. And NEBO is a mountain in it's actually still exists. It was in the Old Testament, and it
Okay.
was where God took Moses to the top of Mount Nebo to
Hmm.
show him the promised land that the people of Israel were going to inherit. So it was
Hmm.
this notion of standing from a viewpoint and just looking over this wide vista.
Hmm.
And it kind of tied in well, because a lot of the stuff I like to shoot is the wide
The
vista,
White Vista.
Like normally when I'm shooting on the wide lens, it's right out at 16mm. It's as much as I can cram into a scene. So I kind of just like that analogy of the kind of taking up and being shown this wide vista of an amazingly beautiful land. So that was where NEBO came from. So we did a rebrand probably maybe a couple of years ago or thereabouts, which was quite interesting. It was kind of always a little bit unnerving whenever you're just trying to do something a little bit different. So
yeah, for sure. That's
NEBO
interesting to know where the name came from as well, because it's, as you say, it does tie into the wide vista. So it ties in from the landscape photography point of view as well, I suppose, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
And like, how then, when you think about photography and your photography journey so far, I suppose that's one area, as you say, about going through the rebrand, but that meant that you had something that was created before going to the rebrand, and now you've come out from the rebrand in regards to the NEBO point of view. But if we go back a bit further, when did you get started in photography? Was it something that you've had from a young age? Did it come through teenage years? Did it come from a necessity from work? Or what way did it start out, I suppose, for you?
For me, I always had a bit of an interest in it, but it was back in the days of film, and I remember I was probably in my late teens and looking at film cameras and looking at the price of film, and I had absolutely no idea where to even start. And then the first digital camera came out. Now I think it was like a 2 megapixel point and shoot thing. This was revolutionary at the time.
Yes.
So I was probably in my early 20s, I would say, maybe, whenever I got this. I got it as a gift from my parents for Christmas. And I literally just went out and started photographing everything, like whether it moved or it didn't move, I shot it. But landscapes was always the thing that I was always drawn to. And I literally trawled the internet. Even back then, probably YouTube wasn't as big a thing. So I joined a community called ePhotozine. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. I think it still exists. So it's basically a website, but it has forums and that kind of thing. And I literally just sat on it 24/7, and you posted up pictures and you got feedback and all this sort of stuff, and you entered little competitions and just absorbed all these amazing landscape photos and was trying to figure out, okay, so how do they get that effect? How do they get that blurry water? You were kind of going through this whole process, and then you realize, okay, so I've got a little point and shoot camera, can't have any filters on it. It's, so I might need to think about the next step up, and then you start to think, right, what filters do I need? And it kind of went from there. And that was kind of how I got into it. It was just a hobby at the time. And as I say, I just photographed everything. I just took the camera with me everywhere. And that was kind of how it all evolved.
Would you kind of class yourself at the time so as an experimental photographer, that you just try something and see how you get on with it? Or were you just saying, okay, no, I don't want to go off and do wacky things with the camera, I just want to stick to the standards? Or did you learn photography by experimenting?
Probably learned by experimenting. Like I did a little spell of shooting macro stuff where I was shooting like water droplets
I can't do macro.
It was like I wasn't really sure what I was even doing, but it was kind of like I saw it in the magazine. So you were like, oh right, okay, let's try that. So you were dropping water droplets onto CDs and getting a wow, look at this, and photographing flowers, and then I was out shooting landscapes again, and then, as I say, trying to do long exposures of water, and it kind of just all evolved from there. I kind of dabbled a little bit, just to kind of see what I was interested in, or maybe I was seeing images online and then think, right, I wonder how they did that. So you were kind of then starting to Google, right, how do you get that kind of effect? And it was a steep learning curve. It really was, just this whole other whole world of something that I had absolutely no idea about.
And within all that learning, is there one particular part of photography that you go, never again, I'm not going to try that again? Or is it a case of, no, I kind of enjoyed all aspects of it?
I for a while I did some newborn photography. So it was around about the time that we had our own daughter. So that was a perfect example, a perfect opportunity for me to get loads of practice in. But I just find I just didn't have the patience for it. It was just an absolute nightmare. So that little very short phase soon passed. But yeah, that was probably about the only one. Because I say I shoot people, I shoot weddings, and kind of like outdoor portraiture stuff as well as the landscape. So I don't really mind photographing people in that sense, but definitely the baby child thing was I found very, very stressful, just to kind of get the shot and have the patience for it.
The interesting thing for me actually is when you mentioned about the amount of times that you can go off out and do different types of photography, and you can experiment, and you might find all of a sudden that, geez, I really like this, or I could get stuck into this and I'm good at this, and then maybe I'll go further with it. But you'll go as far as you can and put all the work into it to master it, but then you never go near it again after you've gotten it, because you kind of go, all right, I know to do that now. But it was a big thing to do it at the time,
Absolutely.
So I think that's what I suppose from my point of view. I always call myself a one-trick pony. All I do is landscape photography. I don't do anything else. And from that point of view is because I've tried all the other things. Okay, I get them in the end, but it's about practice. And I kind of say, am I going to use it again? Probably not. But some things I have done right is when I take photographs with the kids, I've learned a few things there over the years that now I can get the camera, bring it out quickly, bang, get the shot.
Yeah.
Whereas before, if I hadn't pushed myself into learning those things, I'd be still stuck with the, whatever, F11, ISO 100, whatever period of time you're going to take a photograph at, that kind of way.
Yeah.
So I think it's always good to experiment, and it's interesting, as you say, that you went down the different routes from a macro point of view, even with the newborns. I mean, it's not something I'd ever even attempt to do. And one thing I definitely would never do is a wedding. And you might say, geez, okay, but a wedding is good. You can get good at it. You enjoy it. You get paid well. But for me, no, because I find that be more stressful, because you get one shot at a wedding day and it's all resting on you. And if you goose it, you can't rewind the tape. You can't say, oh, look, we'll get people back in again next week and we'll do it. You're goosed, So for me, that's what scares me. But I'll never do a wedding.
Yeah, I once said that as well, quite a number of years ago. And I've shot quite a number since. So yeah, a friend of mine asked me to shoot her wedding. I'd never photographed a wedding before, and she wasn't going to have a photographer. So I said, right, okay, what's the worst that can happen? So I brought another guy with me who had actually photographed a few as a hobby, and I photographed her wedding, and I actually was really surprised that I actually really enjoyed the process of it. Okay. So then it kind of went from there, where someone else asked my wife, would I photograph her wedding? And then somebody else asked, and then I kind of found, this actually is quite enjoyable. And my style of doing it would be quite relaxed. It's quite natural photography, so I'm not using any off-camera flash or anything really dramatically posy or anything like that. So yeah, that kind of just snowballed to the point where something I thought I would never do, I never really had a desire to do. Once I was sort of thrown in at the deep end, I realized, well, actually, hang on, I really enjoy this, and people are willing to pay me to do it. So kind of before I knew it, then I was building up more and more and more. So what I was doing in my job, I was just taking days off, just taking holidays, or obviously working on Saturdays, which was fine. And that was kind of how I fell into wedding photography in a way. It certainly wasn't what I had ever envisaged doing, but I'm really glad that that's how it worked out.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting you say there too, because you kind of grew with it organically from a friendship point of view, as opposed to, shit, I have to go and get a job. Okay, what am I going to do? I have to earn money. Well, no, because you allowed yourself in your mind, I think, potentially, I don't know, but this is a practice run as such because it's for a friend, so you can be more comfortable. Yeah. And did that help you kind of ease into it?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there was really no pressure as such, because the way I looked at it was, well, look, they weren't going to have a photographer, so anything I get's a bonus. It's maybe not the right attitude, but that's kind of where I was at the point. Yeah, and I think one of the good things with wedding photography is that because people book so far in advance, you can plan quite a bit ahead. So when it got to the stage where I started to consider, I wonder, could I actually do this as a job? I was kind of able to plan ahead and book ahead almost a year and a half of work, so that I knew once I hit a certain month, I could actually leave my other job and I could I could walk into the weddings,
Transition over
and
to
I
that.
knew that I would have income coming in regularly. So it was probably one of those really good industries that you could do that, because I know so many of my mates are self-employed, and they're maybe going from 2 to 3 months ahead, and that's maybe all the work that they know that they have. Whereas with the weddings, you can be booked 2 years ahead, and you can look at your diary and you can kind of almost lay out, apart from 2020, which just didn't really pan out. But you can kind of look at your diary and say, okay, well, I know this is the amount of work that I've got coming in over the next year and a half, and then I can kind of schedule other stuff around that, which is quite good.
And speaking of scheduling other stuff around that, is to get out with your hobby, which is from a landscape point of view. I imagine that you kind of relish that then, is it's like a busman's holiday per se, because your wedding work is what's paying the bills, but this is what you enjoy, going off out then into X, Y, and Z locations, I imagine, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing you kind of touched on it as well, about the pressure of the wedding day, and that you've only got really one chance to nail this, and you've got maybe 30 minutes to get an awful lot of photographs covered, and you're always chasing it time wise. Whereas you go out and shoot a landscape, you go out and hike for a couple hours, conditions aren't great, it's no big deal, you just drive home. You're disappointed, obviously, but
Yes.
you can just go back the next day, and there's no pressure, no time pressure, no nothing. So it's a nice balance between the two. But I think one of the things that whenever we did the NEBO rebrand was that we wanted to try and push more into the landscape work, because you're always conscious of, well, do I want to be doing weddings in another 10-15 years time, and you're kind of looking at other avenues of income and other things that you want to kind of grow as a business. So we kind of find, well, okay, let's look at prints, let's look at trying to sell more of a work, maybe doing more workshops, kind of grow that side of the business, so that if anything ever happened, and we find it now with the COVID, that obviously the wedding diary has just vanished this year. So it's been good to have print sales coming in, or an odd workshop here and there. So that side of the business has been really, really helpful, which is kind of scary, because you always think the likes of weddings and things like that are a secure industry to be in, but who could ever have foreseen a curveball such as this? So yeah,
nobody could have ever foreseen it, and even as you say, like, the amount of people that you would have things planned for so far ahead, you could go off and make decisions based on those plans, and all of a sudden, for no fault of your own, those plans are pulled from underneath you. So absolutely, 2020 is a shitstorm of a year, and I think unfortunately, it's not going to go away when we go into 2021, but at least we can kind of put 2020 behind us and hope that it eases as it goes away. And as you say, to get out into the landscape, to switch off and kind of go, okay, breathe in the fresh air, take it all in, and if you get some shots that you can utilize, which we'll talk about later on about printing, then it comes out as a better situation as well. So, and actually something for you there, I suppose, speaking of the landscape. So then, how many years ago did you decide that you wanted to start filming yourself when you were taking your photos in the landscape? Because you started the YouTube channel. I think you stopped it then for a while, and then you came back to it again. So talk to me a bit, I suppose, about how that evolved. How did that start out?
So I actually was looking back, 4 years ago, I think it was, I did the first vlog on YouTube, and
okay,
I was kind of looking, I was searching on YouTube for just like behind the scenes landscape photography trips and things, and Thomas Heaton was obviously the first one that appeared up. So I just binge watched so much of his content, and I just loved the the rawness, and it really was it wasn't a top tips to do this or that. It was just, here I am, this is what I'm shooting, I'm going to bring you along for the journey. So it kind of really inspired me to say, well, okay, could I do something the same idea
along those lines?
So that was kind of how I decided to start vlogging. And yeah, I got to the stage, I think, where I just hit a bit of a burnout, and you'll probably know what that's like. The amount of obviously vlogging that you're doing yourself, and constantly trying to produce video content where your still images are possibly suffering because you're putting this pressure on having all this B-roll and all of this. So it got to the stage where I just was like, I was almost hating the idea of creating a video. So I just took a break from it. I don't know whether that was a good thing for the channel, because I don't know whether when a channel sits dormant for so long that, you know, whatever. But I got back into it, and then I took a break again. And now I've got back into it again. So at the minute, I'm pretty much churning out one video per week.
Very
I'm
good.
trying to do it every Sunday. But I'm also at the stage at the minute where, do you know what? If I don't have a video for the weekend, I'm not stressing
It's not
about
the
it.
end of the world.
I just let it slide, and I'll get one for the next week. Whereas before, I think it was almost you were trying to force yourself to create content just to kind of hit an upload deadline to try and you know, play about with the algorithm and all this kind of thing. And I think that's whenever you start to make pretty poor videos, because you're just forcing it.
You're going through the motion for the sake of having to go through the motion without any intent of creating something that you want to create. It's just I have to create, technically speaking, you know. And it's interesting, I suppose, you say there about the image suffering by recording the video, because there's an awful lot involved in recording video, and you either, as you say, you know, stopped it, came back to it, stopped it again, come back to it. What I find is that I've been doing it now for so long that it kind of comes second nature to me to a certain extent. Not that I'm anyway good at it. I'm not saying I'm fantastic at what I'm doing, but I know when I need to put the camera down to record me walking in, or I know if I see something I want to record to the camera, bang, I'm set up in 20 seconds and it's done. And that's something I think, which from my point of view, it's a pain in the backside, because you just want to go take your photograph. And, you know, we were talking there before we started this about having to stop recording video to catch the light.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing as well, because if you're recording video and the image loses out, then what's the point in recording the video? Because isn't it not to showcase your image, which is why you're creating the video in the first place, as opposed to the image to showcase your video? You know, that makes sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think when it gets to the point where your still images are suffering, then I think that's when you have to just hit pause. Especially if you're trying to run a business and you're trying to sell the prints or whatever.
Exactly.
Financially, what is going to be more beneficial to you, possibly to have an amazing portfolio image or to have a really good video. So it's, I think images always have to come as a priority. And I think once I got that right in my head, I'm actually enjoying it more now, because I don't have I should really be flying the drone when this, you know, I love some amazing drone footage when this light is so good, or I should be filming more B-roll. And I don't even think about that now. It's just like, nope, still images, let's concentrate on that, and then I can kind of bring the video in after that. And that's, I think that's my balance there. I think I've got that right now.
And I agree with you. I mean, like, I've done a video, one a week since September 17. And while sometimes I felt pressure to get it done, there's been a lot of times that I'm like, sure, if I didn't get it done, what was the end of the day? The only person that's going to annoy is me, nobody else. And no, I haven't missed a week. And it's been fun on the other side of it, because it forces me to get out, because, you know, it's a hobby for me. Whereas if I say, okay, at least now I have to go and make sure that I'm getting out maybe once every 2 weeks, I'll try and record 2 episodes for my vlog on one day or whatever, if I can, in the morning or an afternoon and evening. But at least it's forcing me then to say, get out and don't be procrastinating about waiting for the ideal conditions, because you're always going to be waiting for the ideal conditions. And, you know, something I believe in is that there is no such thing as bad conditions in landscape photography. There's always a shot. If you can pull a shot out of any condition whatsoever, I think it's always going to be the bonus by actually being out there. And if you're not in, you can't win. So that's, for me, the opposite end of that. You know what I mean? Because it kind of forces me to get into that zone, you know?
Yeah. And do you find at the minute then that you are you ahead of, so if you're out recording, do you have like a backlog of videos already? Yeah, I've always tried to do that, and I've kind of got to the stage now where I'm literally, so tomorrow's video I only filmed 2 days ago, so I was kind of cutting it really, really fine. But so that was adding a little bit more pressure to come home and, you know, literally download everything, start to edit it that night, and then I'm thinking, gosh, right, I need to edit the images that need to go into it, and I don't really like to do that, because you're rushing the edit of you
The
know,
images,
the
the
actual image
finishing
to
the
finish,
video.
because then it has to upload overnight, and it's just so I've tried to be organized and be ahead, but I never seem to get very far with that. So
I find it really helpful to have that, because it doesn't get that looming deadline and such like that. I mean, I have 3 videos now that are ready to go, and there's one that will be going out Sunday tomorrow, which I recorded, I think in around the 7th or 8th or something like that of October. So it's pre-lockdown and everything else as well. And I've been sitting on it because there's been other things that I've been doing, even with the videos I made for the podcast, with the books and stuff like that. So ordinarily it would have gone out before now, but because
yeah,
I went into that topic and then I had recorded those items, I was able to nudge it along then by another couple of weeks, So yeah, I have a couple of other ones as well that are done, but it's always helpful to have those in the background, because quite rightly, as you say, you go off out, you get some beautiful images, but if you're too late, you might turn around and go, geez, I have to rush these images now just to fit them in the video. When actual fact, once you put the video up, your image, that iteration is now in the video. You can't change that
yeah,
thereafter. And I've had that, number of times in the past that I won't rush the image anymore. Because again, I like to play around with it. And as we all do, you do an editing session, and you might have a very, very good editing session, and then you leave and come back an hour later and you're looking going, what was I thinking?
yeah.
What
I've
was I,
had that
you
quite
know?
a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of either, and I normally find you've actually over processed it as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
under, because you've
Yes.
maybe got totally caught up in the moment and reliving it all, and then you go away and you come back and you think, gosh, the colors just weren't that vibrant. That you've gone way too
Exactly.
far, and then you just
Exactly.
have to dial it
Yeah.
back a bit. So yeah, I've never been a big fan of coming straight home from my shoot, downloading cards, and just going straight into an edit. Even though
Straight in.
I'll maybe download them and check and just have a look at a few that I thought were maybe potential keepers, and check
Same.
focus
Yeah.
and have a little. But I'll never really edit them. I'm not a big fan of just going straight in the moment, because I think you're just too caught up with the emotion of the experience
For
of
sure.
being out in the
Sure.
landscape.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And also, I suppose, and it's something actually, what we'll do is we'll touch on it here in a second. We're going to take a quick break, right? But we'll touch on when we come back, which is, if you over edit your image right now, when it then comes to printing it something thereafter, you have a whole lot of different things to be able to try and deal with. So what we'll do is we'll take a quick break now, and we'll come back and we'll discuss that topic in regards to printing, yeah?
no problem. Yep,
Okay.
perfect.
If you're enjoying this episode of the podcast, why not jump over to iTunes or Spotify and listen to the back catalogue that we have. Some great episodes where we talk about photography, gear, and some excellent guests along the way. Thanks very much for listening and for watching. We'll see you in the next one. And you're very welcome back to part 2 of the Irish Photography Podcast. And like I said before the break there, Stephen, if printing is something which is very, very important, I think, from an image point of view. An image isn't an image until it's on paper. If it's something on a screen, you'll go past it very, very quickly. So you do a lot of printing, and you alluded to it earlier on, I suppose, in the things that we've touched on within different topics. But if I ask you a question, if you're going off out into the landscape, are you going to shoot with print in mind, or are you going to shoot, and if you get a photograph that you can print, it's a bonus?
9 times out of 10, I'll go out with the print in mind. Definitely. Obviously, there are times where you'll be surprised and you'll improvise, or you'll catch something that's maybe not what you were going out for. But yeah, a lot of the time I will be thinking of, okay, like if I'm going out, I definitely want to shoot a panel of this scene, because I think this is going to be something that someone could put on their wall. I'm kind of trying to envisage that as an iconic image, and how it's going to be printed, how it's going to be framed. So yeah, I mean, that might sound a bit pretentious or a bit bold, but I don't like the idea of all of the images that I go out and take just sitting on a hard drive or just sitting on Instagram. And I think we're all guilty of that, where we go out and we can have a hard drive full of amazing images, but they never actually do
See the light
anything
of
more
day.
than that. You bring them home, you look at them, you edit them, you might post them onto social media, and that's it. And they're never to be seen again. So yeah, I think printing is very, very important. Absolutely.
And I suppose on that side of it as well, then, do you do your own printing, or do you send out your printing to be done professionally? Well, not professionally, if
So I
that
do a
yours
bit.
isn't professionally, of course, but you know what I mean by that.
Yeah, no, I do a bit of both. Some of the smaller stuff I would print myself. I use the Photo Speed. I like their platinum etching paper,
Mm-hmm.
their fine art paper. It's got a lovely texture and
Texture
feel
and
to
feel,
it.
yeah.
So I would use it for some of the smaller stuff, but a lot of the other stuff I'll outsource to, a lab that will do a lot of the bigger stuff as well.
Okay.
Whether it's onto the fine art papers or whether it's onto like the Chromolux, the aluminium printing and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I'll just get that all done by a company.
Mm.
Because those guys know, the colors are coming back just right.
Spot on.
Those guys know what they're doing. So it does take a lot of the hassle sometimes, because I know sometimes I've been printing at home, and depending on what kind of paper you're using, and you're trying to proof it before you print, and then you're trying to tweak it before you send it to print, and then it comes out and it's still not just 100%. It can almost be a little bit underwhelming, and then you have to go back again. So there can be a bit of wastage in printing yourself. But there's also an awful lot of satisfaction where, whenever you get that image and it's finished, you can just print it straight away. You don't have to upload it and wait 3 or 4 days for it to come back from a lab. So there is something nice about just being able to do it yourself and have it in hand, just
There.
even not necessarily to sell, but just to have it as a record, and just to look closely at the details and see how it sits on the different papers and stuff. I just find that very, very interesting.
And I think as well the fact that if you're printing it at home, I find anyway that I'm tweaking the edit for the print, as opposed to if I'm normally doing an edit that would go on the screen and such like that. And when I first started that off, all my images were coming out dark, and I was like, why are they coming out dark? What's this about? I'm looking at the screen, I'm going, it looks perfectly bright here in the screen. I'm looking at the calibration on my screen, but it's exactly that, is that you have to tweak it for the print. Otherwise, it's not going to be printed correctly. Yeah?
Yeah, I quite often find you have to push your exposure a bit, maybe sometimes half a stop or something like that, just to lift it, to try and start to get it to match. Other things I'd normally play about with would be saturation and contrast, just to give it, because obviously you're looking at it possibly on a retina screen, so everything's just going to be super dynamic
and backlit,
full of life. And then you go to print it on a matte paper, and it's just going to look so flat in comparison. So yeah, you do have to do a little bit of tweaking with it, but I also think that's a little bit of the enjoyment with it too.
I think so too.
Just kind of mastering and tweaking that, and just kind of getting it to look as it should. But yeah, I think you mentioned as well about the calibration. I think all of that whole process is so important. Whether you're printing yourself or whether you're sending it off to your lab, just to make sure that you have a good kind of foundation in place with the monitor calibration.
Yeah. And also, if you're printing at home, be prepared for a lot of wastage at the beginning. You're going to go through a lot of paper.
A lot of paper and a lot of ink.
Yeah.
It's scary whenever you leave your printer if you haven't, switched it on, especially for the Canons, and you just hear it chugging, and it's like it's just pumped through about 50 quid's worth of ink just to flush out the heads because I haven't used it, and you're like, oh, how much money have I just wasted doing that? But it's just one of those things. Yeah, it has to be done.
For sure. And I suppose, the question then for you is in the different types of prints that you would do. So you do print to order. So if somebody's looking for a specific bespoke print, you will go and you will photograph that for them and then do the print in that way. You also do some abstract prints, and you also do some fine art prints. So I suppose out of, there's probably many more, but let's just pick the 3 of those, I suppose, really. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer to go to shoot for a specific bespoke product, or something that all of a sudden you didn't spot? It's so abstract, and all of a sudden you looked at it and went, wow, that's really, really nice. Or the latter on the fine art?
Well, I guess to touch on a couple of those points, the idea of the abstract, one of the things I loved about it was that you're almost looking for a landscape within a landscape. So you're kind of looking at things just a little bit closer. And what I found with it is that with normal landscape photography, so if you're going out to shoot in golden hour or sunrise, sunset. It's all about the light. Like it's about light. You're looking for the light,
100%.
shadow, the warmth, all of that. With the abstract photography, you could go on a dull, wet, horrible day to a beach and you could photograph patterns in the sand, and it doesn't really matter about how nice a day it is because you're just looking at details. So, living in Northern Ireland, that's quite a good thing to have in your back pocket, that you can just go on a bad day and just go and shoot some abstract stuff. So I quite like that. That was quite a challenge because that was something I'd never really done before. But I think, yeah, definitely the landscape, wide vista, epic scenes, that's still probably my big passion. So you kind of mentioned about the idea of doing commissioned work for people. So there's a couple of ways that has worked in the past for me where someone has contacted me and said, look, can you get an image of this area? I want it as a gift or whatever. And the last one of those I had, which was an extremely stressful experience because it was not a photogenic location that the person wanted. And they gave me like literally, we need it in like a week and a half's time for a gift, and we want it blown up. Now they did, it was quite a nice order. Financially it was a big massive floating frame, but it was like, oh gosh, this is just like, so I'm looking at the weather forecast and I'm counting down, crikey, okay, I need to go to this location and scout it, then I need to go and shoot it, and I may need to go back 2 or 3 times. So I found that extremely stressful, but I ended up, I got what I needed and delivered it, and they were more than happy with it. But the other flip side of that was, you talk about shooting for print. So there was a few people who I knew liked some of the recent Morn photography that I've been doing, and one guy who's actually turned out now to be a client, he had been looking for prints. So I actually went one night and I had a shot in mind that I thought he might like. So I literally went thinking, if I shoot this and this comes off, I think I have someone who might buy it. So I kind of had almost a sale made in my head before I even shot it.
Brilliant.
And thankfully he did. It was a big massive panel, and as soon as I showed it to him, he was like, that's the one I want. That's no doubt about it. That's it.
Bingo.
So in many ways it was a commission, but it wasn't a commission, if that makes sense. So I found that much more exciting, where I was kind of given a little bit of, okay, well, I know they like this area, so I have a lot of scope to work with here. I'm not under any time pressure. So if I need to go back to get the right light several occasions, that's fine. It's much more difficult whenever you're sitting in you've got a week and a half to produce something that someone's going to put on their wall. That's a lot more pressure because, as you know, landscape photography, it doesn't always work out that way. So, yeah, all fun.
But isn't it even better then and more rewarding when you actually do get that and you do nail that shot, or you get that photograph that you think, my God, I wasn't expecting to get the conditions that I got, but bang, look at the conditions, and all of a sudden everybody loves the image, and all of a sudden you're going, I want to buy it, I want to buy it, and you're going, wow,
yeah,
I wasn't expecting that to happen on the day. Versus, again, I made a video around, 2 months ago about expectations, because like if you go out with expectations, all it can lead to is disappointment, because it's never going to reach the expectation that you would have had. Whereas if you go out with low expectations and you have an unbelievable day and you come back with a banger of an image, and then all of a sudden you're making your financial gain from selling them, then that's a far better situation for me, I think, anyway, to be in,
Yeah, absolutely. I think the expectation thing, especially when it comes to landscapes, is it can be very frustrating. As you say, you go out and you think to yourself, you can always become very, very narrow-minded, and it's like, this is the shot. I don't want to think about anything else. I don't want to consider any other options. This is the shot I'm going for. And if I don't get this shot, I'm going to be very, very disappointed. And I often wonder how many other amazing shots you may have missed because you've been so... And I'm as guilty as that at times as well. Like we kind of talked briefly before this. We were recording about my last trip up the Mourns with the inversion. So that was one of those things where my expectation was that whenever we get up here, this is going to be amazing, and we're going to come up through the clouds, and this is going. But that could have went one of two ways. That could have went completely pear-shaped.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's trying to manage those expectations, and just trying to maybe adapt. And if they don't come off well, there's always another time.
Exactly. Yeah, and and people can get so pissed off, I suppose, really, but they had everything in their mind, and all of a sudden, they come back and go, "How'd you get on?" The light was crap. Or, well, it wasn't. It was just okay. I mean, we out. Yeah. Could you have been doing something else? Yeah. Would it have been as fun as that? Maybe not. Okay. Did you have fun? Oh, yeah. It was gave me half an hour more than I thought I was going to be there, or whatever it was. At least you were out and enjoying it,
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, which is a big one. And I suppose, speaking of enjoying it and things that you would have done, I suppose, over the years, I noticed that you're a 2-time award-winning PPA&I Landscape Photographer of the Year. Tell us a bit more about that. How did that come about? What made you think about, did that come from when you were saying about the forum but entering contests, or was it something you say, you know what, I'm enjoying this now, I want to give myself another challenge and I'll enter in some competitions? How did that come about?
So the PPA&I over here, it's the Professional Photographers Association of Northern Ireland.
Yep.
That's the long version of the title. So so it was a group that we join as photographers, and each year they have yearly awards. So you're literally kind of shooting throughout the year with the possibility of, right, okay, at the end of the year I'm going to be hopefully having something that I could be entering into this.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives you a goal. There's loads of different categories: wedding, portraits, all that kind of stuff. So fortunately enough, 2 years in a row, I managed to win the Landscape Photographer of the Year. And I think the second one, which was probably the most rewarding, is that usually these things are judged purely on digital images. So you would submit your panel and get shortlisted, and then they go through another few rounds of judging. But it's all done digitally. It's all done on screen.
Okay.
The second time round, the first section was done digitally, but then the actual, whenever it got shortlisted, the final bit was done on print.
Okay.
So this was kind of one of the reasons when I kind of got more into taking printing seriously, because, these guys were like, paper choice was so important. How you framed it was so important, how everything was finished. So you really had to think about what images were going in, and then what paper you were actually going to be using to print them on, because that could win or
make or break.
It could go either way. So that was kind of then how I got really interested in the printing. So it was quite nice to win it at that point, because I knew, let's face it, when you see images online, it's hard to just always see the quality in them.
For sure.
Because some can be, over sharpened, or, maybe they could be a little bit soft and you don't notice it, all that kind of stuff. So these guys were judging it purely on the print. And I just found that really rewarding, because obviously whenever you print the stuff out, you can't really hide behind anything. So if the quality is there, it's there. And if it's not, it'll just get, looked over and pushed to the side. So, so that was how that came about. So the second time that I got it, it was based just purely on the printing, and yeah, it was very, very rewarding for me, just to have people looking at the work. And trying to remember actually what the image was.
I was just going to ask you that question. Yeah.
The first time it was an image from the Buckle in Glencoe.
Yes.
Second time was actually, it was Donegal. I think it was the Bad Eddie shipwreck. Is it Bad Eddie out in Donegal? Yeah, I think it was the shipwreck of it that won the second time. So
interesting.
Yeah.
It's you say it there about printing the image and putting a panel together. That actually is another level in regards to complexities, because you might look at your images on the screen, as you say, and then you go down the route of what paper am I going to print it on, even from what mount am I going to use, and what way am I going to now line them up as a panel to make a cohesive story across the board. And then you start really fine-tuning and start looking at the details, and you start doing your own worst enemy, which is the equivalent on a print point of view, which is pixel peeping. So you're looking and going, oh, what if they spot that? Is that wrong? And then you would go, I'm overanalyzing this. It's actually perfectly fine. I've gone way, way overboard. And then, I remember when in the Irish version, I suppose, and I went for my LIPF, and I remember going, okay, I got to put my panel together. And I made one big mistake, was I asked too many people for opinions. I originally had thought, if I get my idea, send it off to a number of people, they'll come back and go, yeah, I like this, I like that, whatever. Then I'm able to bring it all and say, okay, this is a culmination of my opinion plus other people's opinions. But I actually made the mistake of asking too many, because then all of a sudden it was diluted so much that I couldn't make up my mind what actually I liked. And I think that's when it comes into, when you're going into a competition, you are potentially putting a panel of images together, not true to yourself per se, that these are the ones I would generally think, but you're thinking about the judges and what they're going to look at and what is it they're looking for this year. And I think that's interesting. You did it 2 years in a row that you'd won it,
Yeah, for sure. There were images that I had put in that didn't even get shortlisted, that I would have been much more confident in, and images that I'd been, well, if any are going to get shortlisted, it'll definitely be that image. And it wasn't, because what we found was the judges are not, well, firstly, they're not emotionally attached to the image, which we are, because we're reliving
True story, yeah.
the shooting experience and the 2-hour hike or the horrible weather that we had to sit and endure to get the image. They don't know any of that. They're looking from a technical aspect, so they're looking at, are there blown highlights, is this composition, they're looking at all of that technical stuff, which I don't know, like, yes, it's important, but sometimes I'd rather have an image that I was emotionally attached to, that may be a little bit technically imperfect, as opposed to having, a technically perfect image, but one that doesn't really have any life to it or feeling to it. So I think if you're shooting for something like a competition or something like that to be judged, it's very, very different than shooting for either yourself or shooting for something that might sell on a wall, because they're two very, very different things.
For sure.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. All right, look, what we're going to do is we're going to take one more break, and we're going to come back then in the final part, and I want to get into the nitty gritty, I suppose. Really, I want to ask you some questions about some gear and what gear you use and such like that. So yeah, look, we'll take one quick break, and we'll be right back after this.
Hello, I'm Mads Peter Iverson, and you're listening to the Irish Photography Podcast.
And you're very welcome back to the final part of the Irish Photography Podcast. So, Stephen, we ask all our guests 3 questions, and I think, I'm going to ask you in exactly the same order I normally ask them as well, okay? So the first question really is, what gear do you use? So what do you shoot with, and what is typically in your bag?
So if you'd asked me this about 6 weeks ago, it would have been a very, very different answer.
Okay.
Because I would have been shooting all Sony.
Okay.
I had been shooting Sony A7 IIIs for my weddings, and then I was using the A7R3 for the landscape work. But I recently switched back to Fuji.
Wow.
For my landscape stuff. So I'm now shooting on their GFX, their medium format, and
GFX 50, is it?
The 50S. And I've fallen back in love with it. I just love it. The Fuji colors, to have them back again, it's just amazing. I had a little spell a few years ago with their XT2 and stuff, and I was shooting Fuji, and then moved across to Sony more so for the wedding stuff, because the track and the IO autofocus, all of that is just
dynamic range.
It's a dream. It's a dream to use on weddings. It's just so sharp and fast. But when I find with the landscape work that the colors just, I don't know, the files that were coming out of it just lacked something. I just didn't, my heart didn't lie with it. Resolution and sharpness, all of that was amazing. It was fantastic. But I think part of me always missed the Fuji colors for the landscape work. I loved their system and how their cameras worked and the look and feel of it. So I went back to Fuji about a month ago, I'd reckon. So the landscape setup is fairly simple. I've got a 23mm lens, which is about 18mm roughly in full frame terms, so quite wide. and then I have a 45 to 100, so that's about 35 to 80 roughly. So we've kind of got a prime and then a wide prime and then a bit more of a telephoto. But so far that's been all I've needed, just those two. It might be nice to add a slightly longer lens for some of the more like the mountain photography and kind of pulling in the peaks and shooting panels and things. But yeah, just those two lenses with the one body. That's what I'm shooting the landscapes with at the minute.
And had you gone all in on Sony? Had you the G Master lenses and everything?
Yeah, I so for weddings I shoot the prime, so shoot 35, 55, 85, which I still have. But I had for the landscapes I had the 16 to 35 G Master. I had a 24 to 105 and a 70 to 200. So I literally just took all of that extra gear and just traded it back in. And one of the reasons actually I looked at the GFX was because they dropped the price by about £1,000.
Okay.
So it actually brought it down in and around more the same price as the A7R4. So I had always looked at it and I always said to myself I would buy one sometime. That was always my dream.
Someday it will be mine.
Yeah, it was just always one of those things where whenever it came out, Fuji had very kindly sent me one for a couple of weeks to try.
Okay.
And I'd never shot medium format before, and I remember getting it and just being completely blown away. And I remember always kind of saying to myself, look, if I ever get the opportunity, I will buy one of these. Now, in relative terms, it's quite an old camera. It's probably 3 years or so, maybe older.
Okay.
So it's not the latest camera out there, but it's an old model, but it's just phenomenal. I just love it. So, and it hasn't actually been that big a change going back to, the body is a bit bigger than the Sony, but the lenses would be bigger. But I don't really notice it in my bag. It's fine. If there's any excess weight, I'm happy to persevere with it for the quality that comes
It's
out
interesting.
Of it. So it is.
Yeah, it's interesting to see more and more people that are moving to Fuji or moving back to Fuji. And again, I've heard it mentioned a few times before, it's just the color palette is something which is, I mean, I'm a Canon shooter and I often, joke with friends of mine that are Nikon shooters and I kind of go, look, all Nikon shots are yellow, all Canon shots are blue. But like when you look at the Fuji, it's kind of a natural kind of it's like an earthy tone or an earthy kind of baseline colors that are within that. And it's really, really nice to see it. And it's interesting that you said nice to go back to that again. So I'd be interested to see, I suppose, how you, a month now into it, how you'll get on with that and progress with that over time too.
Yeah, so with what I found with the Sony was that I ended up switching to Capture One to try and edit the Sony files. A friend of mine who's a commercial photographer, he shoots on the Sony and he was having problems in Lightroom with the colors. So he had been recommended Capture One, and I think it does handle the Sony files. It handles the colors much, much better. But I was always finding that even with the raw files, I had so much editing to do to try and bring them back to what, in my mind, the scene was like. Whereas with the Fuji things now, I'm finding that they're much more, yes, obviously they're raw files, you have to process them, but you just have to do less to them, I find, personally. But I get, I mean, it's just, I guess, what your preference is. I don't think there's no bad cameras and gear out there nowadays. It kind of comes down to, are you a Canon shooter? Do you prefer Nikon? Are you it's one of those things you kind of have to weigh it up. For me, with my weddings, the Sony's a no-brainer. It's a workhorse. The autofocus, all of that tracking is a game changer for that kind of style of stuff. And then for the landscapes. So for me, it's a tool to do a job, and you're kind of weighing up, okay, what's the best tool to use for this particular job? And for me, the Fuji's where I am at the minute with the landscape side of things.
Interesting, yeah. And as I say a moment ago, it'll be interesting to see how you develop with that as well over time then, and get even more akin to it. Because as the more you use something, I suppose, the easier it becomes, the more familiarity you have. And I mean, one of the things, years ago I wanted to move to Sony, and I remember using a Sony at the time going, oh man, no man, even trying to use this was alien to me. And myself and Dermot got invited by Canon to the launch of the EOS R when it first came out a couple of years back. And of course, I was all excited, I'm going to the Canon event, etc. But I picked up the camera, and it's like as if it was my best friend. I knew it already because the menu system, I had already got the experience. I knew my way around it. Muscle memory and everything was there. So moving to the Fuji side of things, you've got a different way of shooting now again because you're having to learn the camera. But like I say, once you start becoming that muscle memory again, and able to grab things quickly, you'll probably then even love it even further again, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I notice now, even when I go back to the Sony, where I'm now, because I'm switching between the two systems, you're doing a few things that, that's not the Fuji, that's the Sony. So you're kind of having to just double guess yourself a little bit. But yeah, over time it'll just become second nature again, I think. Yeah.
For sure. Okay, and another question I suppose we ask all our guests is, what's a funny photography story? So, I suppose you've got a number that you may have had over the years, but is there any in particular, clean one now, by the way, that you can share on the podcast that you can share with us?
Well, so I think probably like most viewers, there's the normal kind of, filters falling off and crashing down cliffs, or, gear blowing over, that kind of stuff. One in particular sticks in my head. I was up on Horn Head, ironically named, in Donegal. This was back about 3 years ago, and I was up with another photographer, and we were heading out along for sunset, and we noticed this couple away out in the distance. Now, they were slightly older generation, shall we say, and the gentleman had a drone, which was fine. That wasn't anything uncommon. So the closer we got to them, they were kind of veering off over towards where the cliffs. And the next thing, the lady decided to strip completely naked, and she lay down in the cliffs. And the husband flew the drone out and was taking pictures of her. And we were kind of going, "What on earth is going on here? This is just not happening. This is a disaster." So, I don't think we actually ever met them again, thankfully. But yeah, that was quite an unusual experience in Horn Head of all places. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll never forget that image.
Brilliant. And I suppose, another one then, and just going back to gear now, if we can briefly, right? So we have a very, very popular segment. It used to be on every week, but, kind of run out of our own gear because I don't have that much, I suppose, that I can class as a kind of a key hero item from my photography gear enough to do once a week. So I'm glad now that, I have somebody on who's fresh here to be able to answer a question, which is our regular segment, our VSP, our very solid product. If you could, you put your name to it. You won't leave home without it, be it from a landscape point of view or a wedding point of view. But it's a photography product that you would stamp your seal of approval on. What's yours?
Probably two from a landscape point of view.
Okay.
One would be an L bracket.
Okay, yes.
I just can't live without an L bracket. I can't stress enough, if you're trying to shoot any kind of panels or portrait images, get an L bracket. It's such a good job. The other thing I have been using for the last few years is spikes on my tripod. Never used them in the past until I watched a video from Simon Baxter a few years ago, and he was kind of talking through them. And obviously, being in a woodland area, he would, they're obviously extremely useful. But I got a set, and I have honestly, I could probably not use a tripod without them now. They're just so handy, and especially if you're out in conditions where it's extremely windy, or you're up in the mountains and whatever, just being able to wedge your tripod down in just even an inch into the ground, it just gives you a bit more stability. So they're not massively exciting items, but I would never be out without either the L bracket or tripod spikes.
And actually, when we were talking about gear there, when we were talking about the camera gear and such like that, but something we've had just ages ago now on the podcast was about the different tripods that people had over the years. And you were a hobbyist with one tripod, you were an enthusiast with two tripods, you were going a semi-pro if you had three tripods, and you were an absolute king of tripods if you had any more in regards to those. So how many tripods do you have? How many tripods have you had, and what's your tripod using at the moment that the spikes are in?
So at the moment I'm using Gitzo
Yeah.
tripods. I've had them for probably 5 or 6 years now.
Yes.
I did go through a little spell of being connected with another tripod company, which I will not name,
Sure.
but that was a little bit of a mistake.
Okay.
So I went back to using the Gitzo, which I'd had for years, and I'm now affiliated with them.
Brilliant.
Just over the last couple of weeks.
Brilliant.
But yeah, so we've got I have a couple of their more like their systematic tripods, so it'll just be like their bigger
Yep.
tripods, and then I have one of the smaller traveler ones which I use more for the vlogging setup. So it's really lightweight. I can literally grab it with one hand, and it's something I don't need to be too precious about. I don't know if you find that as well, but with the vlogging gear, sometimes it needs to be almost stuff that you can just kind of throw down quickly.
Yeah.
Notice, and you don't have to be too precious if cameras get bumped about or tripods get scraped or banged. But I know that this gear it'll just last. It's so well built. So yeah, Gitzo is what I'm using at the minute, and yeah, finding their stuff's extremely good.
Gitzo are great.
So it is.
They're great. I mean, I got a new one 2 years ago, and I'm a seascape photographer, and I've yet to bring it to the sea, because my previous Gitzo I brought to the sea, and as well as how good they are, is if you're getting grains of sand, it's going to get stuck. It's going to scratch the carbon fiber. It's going to get inside in the mechanics. And I just said no, and I haven't brought my newer one to the sea yet, for that reason. But even with my older one, they're bulletproof. I mean, you know, you clean it down after you finish, you're perfect. You're golden again. You know, so yeah, they're good. They're good. Good tripod. Expensive, mind you, but
they're they're not cheap. What I would say to people though, if you know, it's like buy the best tripod you can afford, because you know, if you're going out spending, you know, all this money on camera gear, thousands of pounds worth of stuff, you know, you want something solid. You want something that's going to be, you know, it's not going to blow over in the wind. It's a leg's not going to get pulled out, whatever. So invest what you can afford. Definitely, you'll not regret it.
And you know what? It's like I said a moment ago, the amount of tripods people would collect over the years, because they'll start off with a cheap one and go, sure, I won't get an expensive one. I'll see how I get on. And then the next time I'll go one bit more expensive. And then all of a sudden they're going, should have gone for the expensive one in the first place. And we had a previous guest, Thor. He's a guy from Iceland. And you know, he was telling us the amount of people that would come on tours with 5D Mark IVs on a tripod that cost them $40, and they're bringing it onto, you know, Vic, and they're expecting nothing bad to happen. And it's just crazy when you think about it, because it's really, really important. And the systematic stuff from the Gitzo as well is really, really good. That's heavy. That's a heavy system to be carrying around. But you're not budging anywhere, and I agree with you. You know, get good shoes, get good feet, and get good spikes there now, which is your VSP. So good VSP. Yeah, good product.
Thank you.
So listen, you know, you survived the three questions, I suppose. You know, so let me ask you, what's next for you in this current upside down world?
Wow. I guess a lot's going to depend on what restrictions are still in place. Like we were meant to be in Iceland doing a tour workshop next month, and then was meant to be going to Lofoten in January. So that obviously was all hit in the head. So yeah, I'd love to just get out and about again. I had hoped to get to the Lake District. That was one of my other autumn locations that I had hoped to get across to. So yeah, I would like to get traveling a little bit again. Even if it's just across to the Lake District or up into the Highlands or something like that. Or else just travel around Ireland. I just I don't know what it is. It's just you almost get a little bit like cabin fever now, because you're told you're not allowed to go go to all these places, which kind of makes you want to go even more. So I'll probably just let the rest of this year roll out and see where we are at the start of the year, and then start to plan ahead. Hopefully maybe with some more workshops or tours for 2021 and going forward. But yeah, just keep getting out, shooting as much as I can,
and enjoying it.
I've been really enjoying being up in the Mourns since probably February, March time. I've been doing a lot of hiking and shooting in the Mourns, so I've kind of had a newfound love for it.
Have you ever come down
So
on our west coast further down now, down to the likes of, say, Clare and to Kerry and to Cork?
yeah, I've done Cliffs of Moher and been down in Dingle and Slayhead and Dunquin and places like that.
Okay.
I had hoped over the summer I would travel a bit more down around the south of Ireland, but again that didn't happen. So
Yeah.
as soon as things start to ease a little bit, especially with the wedding work being a little bit quieter,
Sure.
I'll hopefully get out and about and try and get down the west coast, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we're out of time now. So if anybody wants to get any more information, I suppose, on you, where can they find more information on Steven Hanna?
So yeah, on YouTube, I just go under Steven Hanna, so that'll be pretty straightforward. On Facebook and Instagram, it will be NEBO Fine Art. So if you
Brilliant.
check that out, probably more active on Instagram than Facebook. But yeah, NEBO Fine Art or else Steven Hanna on YouTube.
Brilliant. Perfect. So Stephen, listen, look, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I've really enjoyed, getting the background story and where your thoughts are. And it's been quite interesting as well, I suppose, to see the different progressions that you've done over the years. It's been fascinating to hear. I hope you've enjoyed coming on and kind of giving us a background in regards to that anyway.
I have, yes. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So look, from me down in Cork, it's been a pleasure. And hopefully I will see you in the landscape at some stage in real life. But for now anyway, thanks a million. Slán go fóill.
Thanks very much.
Hey guys, if you dig what you're hearing, why don't you jump over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and don't forget to share with your friends. With all that done, we'll see you next week, and remember, keep shooting.